my honors contract presentation. So for my contract, I did Italian family and culture. So, for a brief history of family in Italy over the years. So, for centuries, Italy was divided into separate states controlled by different countries in Europe until 1861. And in 1861, all of the different regions in Italy were comprised of different customs, different economies, different traditions, different languages, and even just sort of the family trends throughout each region were different. So 74% of the country was illiterate when Italy was unified, and the infrastructure was largely underdeveloped. And it was largely an agricultural country, but it was also less productive than other European countries agriculturally. So northern Italy was much wealthier than the south, where issues like poverty, unemployment, and other economic issues were prevalent. Before unification occurred, family law was different across the different Italian states, from father's authority, where the father would dictate every event in the family, to postmarital residence rules. So Southern Italians tended to have larger families than the North because they were more of a farming community, so they needed bigger families to help raise the farm. During the second half of the 19th century, Italy experienced a rapid decline in fertility, which was focused in the North. The South experienced a similar decline between 1930 and 1940, and at the end of World War II, fertility rates increased like they did everywhere, but Italy experienced a decline again in the late 1960s, which continued to the present times. And just like America experienced a lot of social change, like feminist movement, civil rights, and other political movements, Italy experienced similar ones. The feminist movement and the introduction of the divorce law in 1970 and the abortion law in 1978 led to a disconnect between region and society, which vastly changed the composition of the Italian family. So today, the Italian family is made up of one or two children, and Southern families continue to have more children than Northern families. So what's a typical Italian family look like? In recent decades, research on Italian family and tradition has shifted a lot from a focus on the immediate family to a broader look on the Italian family within the broader Italian community and society. So fundamental characteristic of the Italian family is stability, and this is widely because divorce is still very like a stigma around divorce in Italy. It's getting more common, but there is sort of a stigma around it where it's not very encouraged. Since the 1950s, Italian households have become a lot more singles living alone and married partners living alone and deciding not to have children. Families with children and other family members living in the household have progressively decreased, so there's not a lot of grandparents living with their children and their grandchildren anymore. Southern families have more extended family members living within households, and Italians are considered family-oriented with a lot of ties of solidarity amongst intermediate and extended family members. And this is pretty consistent throughout the entire country, North and South and Central. Italian culture researcher and author Macklin stated that traditional Italian family is known to be a legal, lifelong, sexually exclusive marriage between one man and one woman with children where the male is the primary provider and the ultimate authority. So that's what we would consider a nuclear family. So that's sort of the family structure that's seen to be like the pinnacle of the Italian family. The majority of Italian families don't live with their extended family members, like I said, but the vast majority of Italian households are married with children, but singles and married couples households are increasing. And this is largely because rent is really expensive in Italy. The job market is very saturated, and women are more encouraged to get an education, which we'll talk about in the next few slides. So this is a brief interview that I did with Professor Don Martello, who's a professor in the Italian department at ASU. So I'm just going to play this video.
My name is Chiara Dal Martello, and I'm from a very small town in the north of Italy, North Italy, in the province of Vicenza. The region is Veneto, which is the same region as Venice. Okay. So I'm about 40-minute drive from Venice. I'm the youngest, but I have a twin sister. I have two two brothers and two sisters. So it's four girls and two boys. So I was born in the 60s. So and most of my brothers were born in the 50s because my older brother is 11 years older than me. I was born 1964.
Okay.
So at that time, it was still common.
Okay.
The 50 and until middle 60, it was when there was the economic boom in Italy. Okay. So it was common to have at least 4 children. I mean, most of my uncles and my aunts on my father's side, they all have at least 3 or 4.
Okay.
Which is a lot for nowadays.
Yeah.
Modern. So my family, it was still considered traditional. Okay. And actually, Veneto, the region of Veneto, and you can talk maybe about this, is very wealthy now. In the last 30 years, 30, 40 years after the economic boom. Before, it was mainly a rural society, and it was the poorest region in the north until the 60s. Now is one of the richest of Italy. They have a lot of very small businesses. A lot of them are family businesses. So I want to say that people still have at least 2 children. Some people 3, but it's high for the average in Italy. One of my sisters doesn't have any. I have only 1. And my brother Lorenzo has 4, which is very unusual. Yeah. My twin sister has 3. But then my older brother, my older sister, they have 2 each. All my siblings, all 5 of them, so 4 of them still live in Veneto. 3 of them live practically around my parents' house, because my parents' house, I was raised in a farm. Okay. So it's a large property compared to other. So my older brother took over the farm, and now his son lives in the old house. My twin sister married the guy next door. So you just cross the creek and she's on the other side. And then my middle sister, when my father passed away, she inherited my brother's house because my brother moved in the whole house. So she also lived on the same property as well. So the 3 of them are like 100 yards from each other. Wow. So now it's common to have your own house, either an apartment or a house, but it's very common to live on the same street, on the same building. Like grandparents are like on the ground floor, you are on the first floor, your brother is on the second, and very common.
You said that your parents had you when they were older. Is that common as well?
Yes, in particular for a tradition. Okay, so there are two differences. For traditional families, it was common because they had a lot of children. Okay. So my grandma, my father's side, there are 8 of them, but she had her last one that she was 40 because she had her first one that she was 20. Makes sense? Okay. Nowadays, in modern Italy, women have children later than it used to be because they wait to get an education, they wait to have a career, and then because they want to be independent. I can see with my nieces and nephews, and some of them are in their 40s now, 30s, because my brothers and sister are older, and they all waited. Most of them, there's only 1, 2 of them have children in their 20s, but the rest were all in their 30s. Italian is still a patriarchal society in a lot of ways. They're trying to make it better, but it's yet not really working. And really, as a woman, you don't understand that, you don't see that until you leave your culture and you experience another culture like I did. Right. A lot of women decide not to have more than 1 child or 2 because men are not raised yet to help in the house or to help with raising children. So women make a very rational decision like, I have to work, I have to do the house, I have the children. Well,
How would you say, because you talked about a patriarchal society, how would you say in your childhood girls were treated in comparison to boys in the way they were raised and in school, at home?
well, my family is a perfect example because um, I wasn't allowed like to work in the fields or drive a tractor.
Right.
But my brothers were not expected to prepare the table for eating or help my mom in the kitchen or clean up. They were not expected to even clean their own rooms. Males had a lot more freedom,
Right.
even going out at night and come back. My dad was a little strict with them too, but not as much as he was with us, with the girls.
Would you say that that's becoming less common, that it's very like boys do this, girls do this?
In Italy,
Mhm.
not enough. No.
Mhm.
So what is changing is that I think women are raised to get an education when 50 years ago a lot of them were not allowed. Now women are encouraged to get an education, encouraged to be independent, encouraged to be financially independent. But on the other hand, men are not raised any different.
Would you say that there's more independent, financially stable, educated women in more urban areas versus rural areas? Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So school was always a priority. Not necessarily good grade, but do what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
You know, I wasn't punished if I didn't get an A, or you know, as long as I was putting an effort. Mostly we were sent to bed without dinner.
Oh wow. Okay.
That was the punishment.
Okay.
And usually were the boys that were more punished. It's kind of interesting. Boys were more punished than women, than girls. For boys, it was mostly my father that would discipline, and girls, it was my mother.
Okay. How were birthdays and name days typically celebrated?
A birthday had a cake.
Okay.
When we never had cake the other days of the week or the year.
Right.
So it was a big deal.
Okay.
Onomastico, the name day, it was not a big deal. They tell you happy name day. My grandma would give us candies, like a little bag of candies. That's it. So it wasn't celebrated, the name day, but birthday, definitely, yes.
Okay, so a recap of that interview. So Professoressa Del Martello is from Vicenza, which is near Venice. 80% of Italians still live in the same area they were born and raised in, as she said. Birthdays are a big deal in Italy, and she mentioned how when she was younger, she would get a birthday cake, which they didn't have cake on the normal days of the year, so that's what made it a big deal. She has five siblings, two older brothers, one older sister, and one twin sister, which she said is pretty rare now in northern Italy. And then what's changing? Women are raised to get an education, and men are afraid of independent women, as she said. That's more of an opinion, but it is definitely a lot of research shows that the family sort of makeup is changing a lot because women are encouraged to get an education and pursue their career before starting a family. So, typical Italian traditions. So, as Dr. Del Montello said, birthdays are a big deal in Italy. There are some American celebration similarities between America and Italy, but the biggest difference is that Italians plan their own birthdays and they pay for everything. So if they have a birthday dinner, they will pay for the dinner. But Italians do bring gifts, and they sing happy birthday, they have a cake. Another difference is that 18 is the big birthday, not 21. So and that's because Italians can vote at 18, they can get their driver's license, and that's when they're considered an adult. Onomastico, I mentioned in the interview with Dr. Damatello, this means name days in English. And basically, it's when Italians will celebrate the day that there's the saint that they're named after is celebrated. But this is more of a dying tradition because it's more of a tradition with older generations than it is nowadays. And then common holidays. So next slide. So December 8th is Day of Immaculate Conception. So this is a big feast. It represents when Mary was graced by God to lead a life free of sin. So they go to church and they have a big feast with their family. December 24th is La Vigilia, which is Christmas Eve. So they have a big seafood dinner, they go to mass, they typically have a red tablecloth with their dinner, but each region celebrates it a little bit differently. January 6th is La Befana, which means witch in English, and it's an old folk tale where an old woman delivers gifts to children on Epiphany Eve. So she's kind of like Santa Claus, and she fills up socks with treats or coal, depending on if the child is naughty or nice. And it marks the end of the holiday season in Italy. And then November 1st is Ognissanti, which is All Saints' Day. So they celebrate with a big Catholic feast, and it honors all the saints who died in the Catholic Church. And they go to Mass on this day as well. So how are children raised in Italy? It wasn't included in the video clip, but Dr. Darmatello mentioned to me how most Italians do not have nannies because their childcare is made up of family members and close friends. So this is where the phrase of takes a village kind of comes into play, where the extended family and more of the broader community takes part in raising the children. And then Dr. Damatello mentioned how she wasn't really spanked, but she was sent to bed without dinner as a common punishment. But past generations in Italy, corporate punishment was a big form of punishment in past generations. But in 1996, the Italian court banned corporal punishment in domestic environments and in schools. But it's, it's hard to monitor spanking, so corporal punishment still does take place. A study involving 1,000 Italian parents with a child between 3 to 16 living in Italy found that 28% of parents of children between 3 to 5 years old, 21% of parents of children between 6 and 10 years old, and 26% of parents with children between 11 and 16 were opposed to smacking or spanking their kids and didn't do it. And around half the parents said they only spank their kids in exceptional circumstances. And then the same study found the following trends in Italian families. So they found that most Italians, in comparison to other European nations, have a typically positive approach to parenting. They describe themselves as patient and permissive. They feel they're both an authority figure and a friend to their kids. 8 in 10 Italian parents say they encourage their children's independence. And Italian parents tend to be control freaks, but they're also hands-off in the sense that they have this idea of open-mindedness and wanting their children to be independent, but they also feel that they need to establish very strict rules and boundaries for how they expect their children to act. And then almost 50% of Italian parents are reported being worried about their children's safety and health. But they worry even more about their job security, which is a stress factor that the study said transferred into the home. And then, as mentioned in our text, young people stay with their parents until they get married, which really is not seen, as it is in America, as shameful or unusual. It makes sense to Italians because rent is so high, so it makes sense to save money and live with your parents until you can afford to live out on your own. Or you want to start your own family. So even university students will live at home, like our text said. So the school system in Italy, the Italian Constitution, like the US, it guarantees public schooling and independent universities. So private schools are permitted, but only about 10% of Italian students actually go to private school, which is a lot different than in the US. So kindergarten, scuola dell'infanzia, is from 3 to 6 years old. Primary or elementary school is scuola primaria, and that's 6 to 11. Secondary or middle school is scuola media inferiore, which is 11 to 14. And then high school is scuola superiore, and high school is actually not required like it is in the US. So but 81% of Italian students do graduate from high school. And then the university has 3 levels, either 2 to 3 years, 4 to 6 years, or 2 to 5 years, or a doctorate lasting 3 to 4 years. And like I said, private schools are not very common. So different trends in education in Italy now. More Italians are going to school and getting higher education than ever before. And that is especially true for females getting higher education in Italy. And then finally, oral exams are a big thing in Italy that we do not have in the US, thankfully. They're extensive, dreaded exams where basically you're interviewed by a professor on an extensive amount of material in front of your entire class, and you're asked to a series of questions, about 5 questions. And the grading scale is between 18 and 30, and you need a 23 in order to pass the class. And they're very difficult. So typically, university takes a lot longer to complete in Italy because you need 220 hours instead of 120 hours in the US. So a typical timeline for Italian university students is not 4 years to complete their degree. It's typically between 7 to 8 years. And as it shows on the slide, only 26% of Italians actually graduate college, which is the lowest rate of any European nation. And that's largely due because it takes so long and because it is very extensive and it's very difficult to graduate from college there. So that's why the rate is so high. And then if you can click on this link, I have it linked in the module. This is just it's an American student who studied in Italy, her account of the oral exam, her experience. And it's really interesting, and it just describes her experience and sort of the process in a better way than I could, since I've never done it. And yeah, these are my sources, and I will be attaching discussion questions and the actual interview with Dr. Del Martello